What's the craziest thing your mom did to protect you? I was warming up on the court for the state championship when my mom fell from the stands and collapsed. The ambulance took us both to the hospital and I stayed by her side for hours while my team played without me. When the doctor said all her tests came back normal, my mom admitted she'd faked a heart attack to get me out of the game. When we got home, I went insane, throwing my trophies at the wall and screaming that she'd stolen the most important moment of my life. There were college scouts at that game who would never see me play now. I told her she was a pathetic, jealous person who couldn't stand watching me succeed at something she never could. The neighbors definitely heard me screaming that I'd never forgive her for faking a heart attack just to sabotage my future. Officer Mitchell told me he was going to break your knee during the game, my mom finally said, her hands still shaking on the kitchen counter. Officer Mitchell was the point guard's dad on the opposing team, a local cop who worked security at all their home games and always found reasons to hassle our team's parents in the parking lot. His daughter Claire and I had been rivals since middle school when I took her spot on the travel team, and things got worse when I broke her scoring record last year. My mom showed me a video from her phone taken at the grocery store yesterday, where Mitchell cornered her by the dairy section and said, "Accidents happen in championship games when girls play too aggressive, and it would be real sad if your daughter's basketball career ended tomorrow." I tried calling the police, but Mitchell's partner answered and said I must have misunderstood. My mom continued, pulling up her call history showing 17 attempts to different departments. Mitchell wasn't making empty threats because 3 years ago, a girl from Riverside accused his daughter of deliberately injuring her during playoffs, and that girl's house mysteriously burned down while they were at the hospital getting her ACL surgery. The fire was ruled electrical, but everyone knew Mitchell had been off duty that night, and his cruiser was seen in their neighborhood. Last season, a referee who ejected Claire for a flagrant foul got arrested for possession after Mitchell found substances in his car during a routine traffic stop, except the ref had been sober for 12 years and passed a urine test the next day. 2 years before that, a girl who blocked Claire's shot in regionals got hit by a car in a parking lot with no witnesses, and the driver was never found even though Mitchell was supposedly investigating the case himself. He told me exactly how he'd do it, my mom said, voice breaking as she described Mitchell's plan to have Claire undercut me. He knew I'd been having issues with that knee since I hyperextended it last month, information we'd kept out of the injury reports. The only way he could have known was from the medical records that cops could access through their system, which meant he'd been planning this for weeks. My mom had tried recording him at the store, but he'd positioned himself perfectly, so the security cameras only showed her looking crazy while he stayed in a blind spot, speaking low enough that her phone only picked up muffled voices. Mitchell had even shown my mom a photo on his phone of me leaving physical therapy last week, proving he'd been following me and documenting my weakness. He said Claire knew exactly which angle to hit to tear the ligaments completely and end my career before it started. My mom called my coach, but Mitchell's brother-in-law was the athletic director who said my mom was being hysterical and threatened to bench me if she kept spreading paranoid rumors about respected law enforcement. I sat there finally understanding my mom had sacrificed my love and trust to protect my future. She showed me texts she'd sent to my dad who was deployed overseas, begging him for advice, but he could only tell her to keep me safe however she had to. We watched my team's loss on social media, 3 points that I could have made up, and I knew everyone would blame me for abandoning them when it mattered most. My mom held me while I sobbed, both of us knowing she'd made the right choice, but that it had cost us everything, including my scholarship prospects and my relationship with my teammates who were already posting about how I'd betrayed them. "At least you're safe and Mitchell can't hurt you now," she said. But then we heard a knock at the door. We both froze because nobody ever came by this late, and when my mom looked through the window, she went completely pale. She opened the door, and Officer Mitchell was standing there in full uniform with papers in his hand. "Evening, ladies. I have a warrant to search the premises for stolen property from the school," he said, stepping inside without waiting for permission. He winked at my mother as he walked past her into our house, and I thought my heart really was going to stop. Mitchell headed straight for my room while his partner planted himself in our doorway like a guard, one hand resting on his belt where his gun sat. I watched Mitchell pull out every drawer from my dresser and dump the contents on my bed, running his fingers through my clothes and tossing my basketball shorts and practice shirts onto the floor. He picked up my team photo from last year and studied it before setting it aside, then moved to my closet where he started pulling boxes off the top shelf. One box had all my medals and ribbons from elementary school that crashed onto the carpet, and he kicked through them with his boot while making comments about how teenage girls always hide things in the weirdest places. My mom pulled out her phone and started recording, but Mitchell's partner stepped between us immediately, saying we were interfering with a lawful search and needed to put the phone away. Mitchell dug through my old gear bag from middle school and pulled out a practice jersey I hadn't worn in 3 years, holding it up and claiming it was stolen property from the school that needed to be documented as evidence. He put it in a clear plastic bag and wrote something on a tag, while my mom kept trying to angle her phone around his partner's body. Mitchell moved to my desk next where my laptop sat closed, and he told me to unlock it so he could search for stolen digital property from the school's system. When I didn't move right away, he mentioned how refusing to cooperate with a lawful search could be seen as obstruction, which would look really bad on college applications and might even result in criminal charges. My hands shook as I typed in my password while Mom grabbed the landline to call our neighbor, asking her to come over right away to witness what was happening. Mitchell sat down at my desk and started clicking through every folder on my computer, opening homework files and essays I'd written, making notes on a pad about documents he claimed looked suspicious or might contain stolen test materials. He spent extra time on my college application drafts, reading them out loud and commenting on how I described my leadership role on the team, saying it was interesting how I thought I deserved scholarships. Our neighbor knocked on the door, but Mitchell's partner wouldn't let her pass the front porch, telling her this was an active crime scene and she needed to stay back for her own safety. Mitchell unplugged my laptop and put it in another evidence bag, then grabbed my phone from my nightstand and 2 USB drives from my desk drawer, saying they all needed to be examined at the station for stolen digital content. He wrote out a receipt on an official form, listing each item with serial numbers, and before leaving, he leaned close enough that I could smell the coffee on his breath. "Accidents happen to girls who don't know when to quit," he whispered, then straightened up and handed Mom the receipt, explaining we'd get everything back when the investigation concluded, which could take several months depending on how cooperative we were. The second their car pulled away, Mom and I just sat there in my destroyed room, neither of us saying anything for what felt like forever. She finally grabbed her tablet from the kitchen and started searching for lawyers who handled police misconduct cases, scrolling through dozens of websites and reviews. We found Jessica Moreau, a civil rights attorney 2 towns over who had won several cases against police departments, and Mom called her emergency number even though it was almost midnight. Jessica told us to come first thing in the morning and bring every piece of paper we had, including the warrant, the receipt, and any documentation of Mitchell's previous threats. We barely slept that night, both of us jumping at every car that passed our house, and at 6 in the morning we were already in the car driving to Jessica's office. We brought printed screenshots of Mom's call history, the grocery store footage on a flash drive we'd hidden in the garage, photos of my destroyed room, and even the texts Mom had sent Dad about Mitchell's threats. Jessica met us at 7:30 even though her office didn't open until 9, and she immediately started examining the warrant Mitchell had used. She pointed out 3 major problems with how the search was conducted, including the fact that Mitchell hadn't listed specific items he was looking for and had seized things that weren't mentioned in the warrant at all. The judge who signed it was someone Jessica knew well, a guy who rubber-stamped almost every police request without asking questions questions, and she said we had strong grounds to challenge the whole search as illegal. She helped us file an emergency motion to get my devices returned immediately and to suppress any evidence Mitchell claimed to find on them, explaining that without probable cause, nothing from that search could be used against me. Mitchell showing up with that warrant right after the game seems awfully convenient timing. I wonder who tipped him off that we'd be home. The way he went straight for specific items makes me think he already knew exactly what he wanted to take. Jessica also drafted a complaint to Internal Affairs about Mitchell's conduct, though she warned us that police departments rarely took these seriously when it involved one of their own officers. She said they'd probably do a quick investigation, interview Mitchell and his partner who would back each other up, then close the case saying they found no wrongdoing. Still, we needed to create a paper trail showing we'd followed proper channels and reported everything because it would help our civil case later. She told us to document everything from now on, save every receipt, take photos of anything suspicious, and vary our daily routines so Mitchell couldn't predict where we'd be. She gave us her cell number and said to call immediately if Mitchell approached us again, and she'd file for an emergency restraining order, even though judges rarely granted them against cops. That afternoon, I walked back into school for the first time since the championship game and immediately saw kids staring at me in the hallway. My stomach dropped when I turned the corner to my locker and saw huge red letters spelling out SNITCH across the metal door. The paint was still wet enough that it dripped down like blood, and kids were taking pictures with their phones while pretending not to look at me. I grabbed my books fast while the janitor walked over with a bucket and scraper, shaking his head and telling me the security cameras in this hallway mysteriously stopped working last night. He started scraping at the paint, but we both knew everyone had already seen it and posted it everywhere by now. I texted Mom a picture and she pulled up to the school 20 minutes later, her face tight with anger when she saw me waiting by the front doors. We drove straight to the phone store since Jessica had told us to keep communication going even with my devices seized by Mitchell. The store clerk set up a basic phone with a new number and Mom paid cash, making sure nothing could be traced back to our regular accounts. That night, while I was doing homework on Mom's laptop, the new phone buzzed with a text from Sandra's number. She said the whole team was talking about how I abandoned them at championships, and someone in their group chat was spreading rumors that I must have been on drugs to miss the biggest game of our lives. Sandra forwarded me screenshots showing Claire posting that she heard from reliable sources I'd been using performance enhancers, and that's why I really didn't play. Other teammates were piling on, saying it made sense why I'd been playing so well lately, and how I probably knew I'd fail a drug test. Sandra said she didn't believe it, but most of the team did, and Coach wasn't doing anything to stop the rumors from spreading. The next morning, I was in first period when the office called me down, and I found Coach waiting in his office with a clipboard and a stern look on his face. He said I needed to return all team equipment immediately, because inventory showed I had thousands of dollars worth of gear checked out that was now missing. I told him everything was in my locker or at home, but he shook his head and said the equipment room records showed I'd signed out practice jerseys, warm-up suits, team bags, and training equipment that hadn't been returned. He showed me a list, but I recognized none of the serial numbers or checkout dates since I'd never signed for half this stuff. Mom arrived 15 minutes later after I texted her, and she demanded to see the actual inventory records, not just his handwritten list. Coach shuffled through papers on his desk, claiming he couldn't find the originals right now, but the athletic director had personally confirmed the missing items. He said I was suspended from the team pending a full investigation and possible criminal charges for theft of school property. Mom's hands were shaking with anger, but she kept her voice level, asking for copies of everything he was claiming. Coach said the copier was broken, but he'd email them later, though we both knew that email would never come. We went straight from Coach's office to the athletic director's office down the hall, where Mitchell's brother-in-law sat behind a big desk with awards covering the wall behind him. The AD smiled like we were having a friendly chat and suggested this could all go away if we just dropped our complaints against Mitchell. He leaned back in his chair and said he was looking out for my future since colleges don't recruit troublemakers who cause problems for their communities. He talked about how unfortunate it would be if these theft allegations had to be reported to college scouts and how it might affect my transcripts. Mom recorded the whole conversation on her new phone hidden in her purse, while the AD kept talking about how misunderstandings happen and everyone should just move forward. He said Mitchell was a good man who'd served our community for 20 years and didn't deserve to have his reputation destroyed over a miscommunication. 3 days later, Jessica came with us to another meeting where she demanded to see chain of custody documentation for all this supposedly missing equipment. The AD's face got red as he shuffled papers and mumbled something about records being damaged in a recent water leak in the storage room. Jessica asked how convenient that the only damaged records were the ones we needed to see and whether insurance claims were filed for this water damage. The AD said they handled it internally without insurance, and Jessica made notes while raising her eyebrows at everything he said. She asked for the serial numbers of the missing equipment so we could check if any of it showed up at used sports stores or online. The AD said those records were also water damaged, and Jessica openly laughed, saying she'd never seen such selective water damage in her entire career. Walking to our car after that meeting, Mom grabbed my arm and pointed across the street where Mitchell sat in his police cruiser. He wasn't even trying to hide, just parked there watching us walk to our car with his sunglasses on despite the cloudy day. Jessica took out her phone and filmed him sitting there, but he didn't move, didn't wave, just stared at us through his windshield. We got in our car and drove away, but I saw him pull out behind us, staying 3 cars back but definitely following us. Mom took random turns and he stayed with us for 6 blocks before finally peeling off when we pulled into the grocery store parking lot. That night, Mom got a call from her manager at work saying they'd received anonymous complaints about her performance and were cutting her hours effective immediately. The manager sounded embarrassed, saying he didn't believe the complaints, but corporate was insisting on the hour reduction until they could investigate. Mom asked what the complaint said, but her manager just mumbled about punctuality and attitude, even though Mom had perfect attendance for 3 years. The timing right after we'd filed complaints against Mitchell felt way too convenient to be coincidence. Mom sat at the kitchen table calculating bills, trying to figure out how we'd pay everything with her hours cut in half. Later that evening, Dad finally got through on a video call from overseas, his face pixelated and freezing every few seconds on the laptop screen. He looked tired and frustrated, his jaw tight as Mom explained everything that had happened since the championship game. Dad kept saying he should be there, that he was trying to get emergency leave, but his commander said the process could take weeks. He told us to stay strong and document everything, make copies of all our evidence and store them somewhere safe outside the house. Dad said he'd been calling the base legal office trying to get advice, but they said civilian matters were outside their jurisdiction. He promised he'd keep trying to get home, but we could see the helplessness in his face through the bad connection. The call dropped twice, and when we finally got him back, he just kept repeating that we should vary our routines and watch our backs. I could tell he wanted to reach through the screen and protect us, but he was thousands of miles away, and Mitchell was right here in town. Jessica called the next morning suggesting we think about going to the media with our story, but Mom and I worried that would just make Mitchell angrier and more dangerous. Jessica said sometimes public pressure was the only way to make corrupt systems actually do something, but we needed to be careful about how we approached it. That afternoon, our neighbor knocked on our door carrying a folder with papers inside. She'd written up a notarized statement about seeing Mitchell's cruiser parked across from our house for over an hour before he showed up with the warrant. She said she'd been watching TV when she noticed the car sitting there with someone inside, and she thought it it was weird because cops don't usually stake out our quiet street. The timestamp on her security camera footage proved Mitchell had been watching our house, planning his entrance before he knocked on our door. Jessica took the statement and said this could help prove Mitchell was harassing us, not just doing his job. She immediately sent a preservation letter to the grocery store where Mitchell had threatened Mom, demanding they save all their security footage from that day. The store's lawyer wrote back saying they only kept footage for 30 days and we were already on day 28. Mom and I rushed to the store the next morning with Jessica on speakerphone guiding us through what to ask for. The manager seemed nervous but gave us a USB drive with the footage after we signed some papers. Back at Jessica's office, we watched the grainy video showing Mitchell backing Mom against the dairy case while she tried to move away from him. You couldn't hear what he was saying, but his body language was clearly aggressive, leaning into her space and pointing his finger in her face. Mitchell's playing connect the dots with harassment tactics while everyone else pretends water damage has perfect aim for destroying only the papers that matter. Truly remarkable how selective Mother Nature can be when she's got a badge-wearing friend whispering suggestions in her ear. Jessica saved multiple copies and said while it didn't capture audio, it definitely showed intimidation. 2 days later, Jessica's phone rang during our meeting and she put it on speaker. James Bernard from the State Attorney General's office was returning her call about our case, saying he'd been tracking complaints about Mitchell for years, but people always got too scared to follow through. He wanted to meet with us, but not at his office, suggesting a coffee shop 2 towns over where Mitchell wouldn't have eyes on us. At the meeting, James spread out folders showing complaint after complaint against Mitchell that never went anywhere. He explained that building a case against a cop required overwhelming evidence and witnesses brave enough to testify in court. Most people backed down when they realized how dangerous it could get, how Mitchell could make their lives hell using his badge. James suggested we should think about temporarily relocating until the investigation was done, maybe staying with relatives in another state. Mom shook her head and explained we couldn't afford to move, and I couldn't leave school with just months until graduation. My whole life was here, and running away felt like letting Mitchell win. James nodded like he'd heard this before and gave us a list of safety tips instead. He told us to vary our routes to work and school, never take the same path twice in a row. We should check under our car for tracking devices, especially around the wheel wells where they're easy to hide. He showed us how to spot a tail and when to call 911 versus when to drive to a public place. The next week at the school, I was putting my stuff away after practice when Sandra came up behind me looking nervous. She glanced around to make sure we were alone, then pulled out her phone to show me screenshots. Claire had been bragging in their group chat about how her dad was going to teach our family what happened to people who messed with them. The messages were awful, Claire laughing about how we'd learn our lessons soon enough. Sandra begged me not to tell anyone she'd shown me because Claire would destroy her socially if she found out. I took pictures of the screenshots with my phone while Sandra kept watch at the door. She said she couldn't stand watching this happen anymore, that what Mitchell was doing was wrong and everyone knew it, but nobody would speak up. Jessica met with Sandra privately the next day at a park where nobody from the school would see them. She helped Sandra write out a confidential statement about what she'd witnessed and explained how to preserve the digital evidence properly. Sandra's hands were shaking as she signed the papers, terrified of what would happen if Mitchell found out she was helping us. Jessica promised to protect Sandra's identity as long as legally possible, but warned there might come a time when she'd have to testify. Sandra said she understood, but couldn't sleep at night knowing what was happening to us. 3 days later, Mom went to the school for a parent meeting about my suspension, and when she came out, her car had been keyed all along the driver's side. Deep scratches spelled out ugly words I won't repeat here. The security guard claimed he didn't see anything, even though his booth had a perfect view of where Mom had parked. He said he must have been doing rounds on the other side of campus, but the log showed he'd been signed into his booth the whole time. Mom took pictures of the damage while other parents walked by pretending not to notice. The next morning, I found a plain white envelope stuffed in our mailbox with no stamp or return address. Inside was a typed note claiming the athletic director's assistant had been told to create fake inventory records about missing equipment on Mitchell's direct orders. The note said the assistant felt guilty, but couldn't come forward without losing their job and health insurance for their sick kid. I showed it to Mom, who immediately called Jessica to add it to our growing file of evidence, even though we had no way to verify if it was real or just someone messing with us. 2 days later, I was walking home from the school taking my usual route down Maple Street when I noticed a police cruiser creeping along behind me. The car stayed about 20 feet back, matching my walking speed perfectly as I continued for 2 blocks, then 3, then 4. My hands started shaking as I reached the corner of 5th Street and finally turned around to look directly at the driver. Mitchell's partner was behind the wheel, and when our eyes met, he just smiled and gave me a little wave before hitting the gas and driving off like nothing had happened. I practically ran the rest of the way home and locked the door behind me, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. The next week in chemistry class, we were taking a test on molecular structures when suddenly I couldn't breathe. My chest felt like someone was sitting on it and black spots started dancing across my vision as I gasped for air. The teacher rushed over and helped me to the nurse's office where they called the counselor who sat with me for an hour, teaching me breathing exercises. She had me count to 4 while inhaling, hold for 4, then exhale for 4, repeating until my heart rate finally slowed down. I could see the worry in her eyes as she asked gentle questions about what was causing me so much stress, but I couldn't tell her everything without sounding crazy. Jessica filed paperwork for a restraining order against Mitchell that same week, documenting all the harassment and intimidation we'd experienced. The hearing was scheduled quickly, and we showed up with folders full of evidence including the grocery store footage, witness statements, and photos of my mom's keyed car. The judge barely looked at our documents before denying the request, stating that Mitchell had been acting in his official capacity as a law enforcement officer. Mom grabbed my hand when we realized it was the same judge who had signed Mitchell's search warrant for our house. James met us for coffee after the hearing and pulled up records on his laptop showing this particular judge had approved over 90% of the police department's warrant requests in the past 5 years. He explained he was building a pattern case, but warned us these investigations typically took months or even years to complete while we were dealing with daily harassment right now. Later that week, Mom stopped by the grocery store to pick up milk, and the manager pulled her aside near the back office. He whispered that Mitchell had come by asking questions about the security footage we'd requested, wanting to know exactly what angles the cameras covered and what we might have seen. The manager said Mitchell seemed angry when he learned we already had copies of the footage, and kept pressing about whether we'd gotten footage from other dates too. Mom thanked him for the warning and left quickly, checking her mirrors the whole drive home to make sure nobody was following her. The next Monday morning during announcements, Coach called a mandatory team meeting in the gym where he stood at center court with his arms crossed. He announced to everyone that due to conduct detrimental to the team, I was stripped of my captain title, and all my athletic awards were being revoked. My teammates sat in complete silence as he went on about how real athletes show up when it matters and don't abandon their team for personal reasons. I kept my eyes on the floor while he talked, feeling everyone staring at me, some with pity and others with anger about the championship game. That night around 10 o'clock, we were watching TV when we heard glass shatter and something heavy hit the living room floor. A brick had come through our front window with a piece of paper rubber banded around it that said, "Stop or worse happens" in black marker. Mom called 911 immediately, but it took the responding officer 2 hours to show up even though the station was only 10 minutes minutes away. He barely took any notes, just shrugged and said, "Kids probably threw it as a prank," and there wasn't much they could do without witnesses or cameras catching who did it. We spent the rest of the night boarding up the window with plywood from the garage while the neighbor's lights stayed off and nobody came to check if we were okay. Jessica came over the next day and helped us write a careful social media post that laid out only the documented facts about what was happening without making any direct accusations. We went through 6 drafts making sure every word was legally safe and couldn't be twisted into defamation or slander charges against us. My hands were shaking as I hit post on Facebook and Instagram, knowing this would make everything public and there was no taking it back. Within 3 hours, my phone was blowing up with notifications as people shared the post and commented with their own stories about Mitchell. Then a message came through from someone named Donna Dubois, saying she was an investigative journalist who had been tracking similar stories about Mitchell for 2 years. She said she had 3 other families willing to go on record about Mitchell's intimidation tactics and wanted to interview us as soon as possible if we were willing to share our story publicly. Donna showed up at our house the next morning with 2 laptops and a stack of folders thicker than my chemistry textbook. She set up at our kitchen table and started recording while Mom made coffee, and I sat there picking at the bandage on my hand from cleaning up the broken window glass. For 3 straight days, she interviewed us about everything, asking for dates and times and names of anyone who might have seen Mitchell's behavior. She talked to our neighbor who'd seen his cruiser outside our house and got her to sign a statement about the exact times and dates. Then she drove around interviewing other people, coming back each evening to show us what she'd found. 3 straight days of interviews with Donna Dubois sounds like the world's longest podcast recording session, except this one comes with actual danger instead of just bad sponsor reads about mattresses. She had notes on 3 other families whose daughters had problems with Claire or Mitchell over the years. One family moved away after their daughter's ankle got broken during a game against Claire's team. Another girl quit basketball completely after her parents' business got shut down for supposed code violations right after she blocked Claire's winning shot. The 3rd family wouldn't talk on record, but the mom pulled Donna aside and whispered that Mitchell had threatened to plant drugs in her son's car if her daughter didn't quit the team. On the 2nd day, a former referee called Donna after seeing our social media post. He emailed her a whole folder of documentation showing how Mitchell filed false reports to get him fired after he called too many fouls on Claire during a tournament game. The ref had kept everything for 3 years. Copies of the false reports, his clean drug tests, witness statements from other refs who saw Mitchell corner him in the parking lot. He said he always knew someday someone would listen, and he'd been waiting for another family to speak up. That same afternoon, I got tagged in posts from an Instagram account using my basketball photos, but with a different username. The account was posting terrible things about my teammates, calling them losers and saying they were nothing without me. I reported it immediately, but the damage was done because half the team had already seen it and blocked me on everything. Mom tried calling their parents, but nobody would answer. Sandra sent me screenshots showing my teammates in their group chat saying I'd shown my true colors and they were better off without me. Then Thursday night, a video popped up on Snapchat of Claire at a party with her friends. Someone filmed her laughing about how she was going to end my career just like her dad ended that girl from Riverside's. She was drunk and going into detail about the exact angle to hit my knee to tear everything. Jessica watched it with us and said it wasn't enough for criminal charges since Claire could claim she was just joking around, but she saved it anyway, adding it to our growing file of evidence showing a pattern of planning and threats. James called us Friday morning with a warning that made my stomach drop. He said if we kept pushing this publicly, Mitchell would probably file counter charges against us for defamation or harassment. We'd have to be ready to face criminal charges ourselves and possibly spend money on our own defense. Mom asked what he thought we should do, and James said we had to decide if we were willing to risk everything to fight this. He couldn't promise we'd win, and Mitchell had the whole police department behind him. That afternoon, the school board sent out an email announcing a special public meeting next Tuesday, where parents could present concerns about the athletic department. Jessica came over immediately to help us prepare what we'd say. We spent hours going through our evidence, picking only things we could prove with documentation. Jessica kept crossing out anything that could be twisted into slander, even if we knew it was true. She said we had to stick to facts that we had paper proof for, or Mitchell could sue us for defamation. We practiced our testimony over and over, with Jessica playing devil's advocate and asking the hard questions the board might throw at us. Monday night, I couldn't sleep, just lying there staring at the ceiling and running through what I was going to say. Around 2 in the morning, Mom shook me awake because she heard something outside. Someone was walking around our house trying the door handles and tapping on windows. Mom called 911, but the dispatcher said all units were busy and it would be at least 40 minutes. Our neighbor must have heard the noise because suddenly his porch light came on and he started yelling that he had a gun and was calling the cops. We heard footsteps running away and a car starting down the street. When the police finally showed up, they barely looked around, just said it was probably teenagers pulling pranks. Tuesday morning, Jessica arranged for someone from the State Legal Observer program to come with us to the meeting. She said it was for our protection in case things got heated or Mitchell tried to intimidate us. The Observer was a law student who would document everything that happened and could testify if needed. We practiced our testimony one more time in the car, focusing only on the documented facts we could prove. The meeting room at the school was packed with people, every seat taken and more standing along the walls. Mitchell sat in the front row in his full uniform, his arms crossed and staring straight at us when we walked in. The board members looked uncomfortable before we even started talking. We presented our evidence calmly, showing the security footage from the grocery store, the documentation from the former ref, the pattern of complaints. Mitchell never moved, just kept staring while the athletic director sat next to him defending everything. The AD said we were making mountains out of molehills, and that Mitchell was a respected member of the community who'd never hurt anyone. The board said they'd look into our concerns and get back to us, but you could tell they just wanted this to go away. 2 days later, a process server knocked on our door and handed me papers. Mitchell had filed misdemeanor theft charges against me for the supposedly missing school equipment, claiming it was worth over $2,000. The court date was set for 3 months out. Jessica showed up at our house the next morning with a stack of papers and started typing on her laptop at our kitchen table. She filed something called a motion to dismiss right there while Mom made coffee, explaining that Mitchell was just trying to scare us into backing down. The charges were completely made up and she said any decent judge would see that, but we both knew the local judges weren't exactly decent when it came to Mitchell. While Jessica worked on the legal stuff, James called to say the Attorney General's office was officially opening an inquiry into Mitchell and the whole police department. The local cops put out a statement on their Facebook page saying they were cooperating fully with the investigation, but Mitchell was still working his regular shifts like nothing was happening. That same afternoon, Donna's article went live on the newspaper's website with the headline, "Pattern of Intimidation Alleged Against Local Officer." She'd been super careful with the wording to avoid getting sued, using words like alleged and reportedly throughout the whole thing. Within an hour, the comment section had over 200 responses, and people were sharing their own stories about Mitchell threatening them or planting evidence on their kids. Mom's phone started buzzing with texts from parents we'd never even talked to before, all saying they'd been too scared to speak up until now. Sandra shocked everyone by posting on Instagram that night, sharing screenshots of Claire bragging about hurting other players and saying she couldn't stay quiet anymore. She tagged me in the post and wrote that she'd seen enough to know I was telling the truth about everything. By the next morning, Sandra had lost most of her friends and got kicked out of the group chat, but she texted me that she didn't care because doing the right thing mattered more. Her post got shared hundreds of times and ended up on the local news Facebook page where even more people started commenting with their Mitchell stories. 3 different college scouts emailed me that week after seeing Donna's article, saying they remembered me from the championship game and wanted to see new footage once my legal situation was resolved. One of them was from a Division II school 3 states away that had a really good physical therapy program I'd been interested in. They said they understood the situation wasn't my fault, and they'd keep a spot open for me if I could get them game footage by the end of summer. Mom found a gym 2 towns over where Mitchell had no connections, and we started going there every morning at 5 before school. The owner was this older guy who'd coached college ball and didn't care about small town drama, just wanted to help me get my game back. My knee was still weak from the hyperextension, but the physical therapist at the gym worked with me on specific exercises to strengthen it without pushing too hard. We'd spend 2 hours there every morning, first doing PT exercises, then working on my shooting form and footwork. Other players started showing up to practice with me, kids from different schools who'd heard about what was happening and wanted to help. Mom would sit in the bleachers with her laptop, working remotely while keeping an eye on everything, making sure nobody suspicious showed up. James called one afternoon super excited because a data analyst volunteering with his office had found something huge in the computer logs. Someone using police department login credentials had been accessing medical records for dozens of student athletes over the past 3 years. The access logs showed the same user ID looking up injury reports right before games where those players got hurt in suspicious ways. It wasn't just me that Mitchell had been targeting, but a whole pattern of kids whose injuries helped Claire's team win important games. Jessica immediately filed a HIPAA complaint with the federal authorities about the medical privacy violations. She said this was bigger than just local corruption now, because violating medical privacy was a federal crime that could mean serious prison time. The investigation would take months to complete, but once the feds got involved, even Mitchell's connections couldn't protect him from that. 2 weeks later, we had to go to court for the preliminary hearing on those fake theft charges. The judge barely looked at Jessica's evidence showing there was no missing equipment, just kept nodding while the prosecutor talked about protecting school property. Mitchell accessing medical records to target injured players makes me really curious about how deep this goes. Who else knew about this pattern and stayed quiet? The timing of those injuries matching database searches seems way too neat to be coincidence, and I wonder what made that data analyst start looking in the first place. Jessica had warned us this would happen, that the judge wouldn't dismiss the charges at this stage no matter how obvious it was that they were fake. She said we'd win at trial when we could present all our evidence to a jury, but that meant months more of this hanging over my head. The judge set another hearing date for 2 months out and reminded me that any violations of the law before then would be taken very seriously. Walking out of the courthouse, Mitchell was standing by his cruiser in the parking lot, just watching us with this little smile on his face. The next week, the school board announced they were bringing in external auditors to review the athletic department's equipment inventory and financial records. The timing was super suspicious because the AD suddenly went on medical leave the day before the auditors were supposed to start. Nobody believed he was actually sick. Everyone knew he was just trying to avoid answering questions about the fake missing equipment charges against me. The auditors spent 3 days going through everything and found tons of problems with the inventory system that the AD had been managing. 3 days later, Sandra texted me a screenshot from the school's online gradebook showing Claire had gotten caught copying an entire English essay from an old paper she found online. The teacher ran it through plagiarism software and it came back 92% copied, which meant automatic academic probation and loss of her National Honor Society membership. Word spread fast that colleges were pulling their offers because academic dishonesty was way worse than just bad grades, and Claire's perfect student image was totally destroyed. Her dad couldn't fix this one since the evidence was all digital, and the teacher had already reported it to the district office before anyone could stop her. I heard from Sandra that Claire was crying in the bathroom after the announcement, and for once her dad's power couldn't save her from consequences she'd brought on herself. The karma felt good, but I couldn't celebrate much since my own future was still messed up from everything that had happened. Mom found a basketball camp at a small college 3 hours away, where I could play without all the local drama following me around. We drove out there early on a Saturday morning, taking back roads to avoid anyone who might recognize us or follow us to the camp. The gym was old but clean, and nobody there knew anything about Mitchell or the championship game or any of the mess back home. I ran drills for 2 hours, my knee holding up better than I'd hoped after all the physical therapy I'd been doing. The Division II coach pulled me aside after watching me sink 12 three-pointers in a row during shooting practice. She asked about my medical clearance timeline and said they had scholarship money available for players who could help rebuild their program. Mom sat in the stands taking notes on everything the coach said, making sure we had documentation of the interest in case we needed it later. On the drive home, we got a call from James saying the Attorney General's office was expanding their inquiry into a full investigation of the whole police department. They'd found enough evidence of problems to justify looking at every officer and every case for the past 5 years. Mitchell got transferred to desk duty the next Monday, which meant he couldn't patrol or carry his gun or do anything except paperwork all day. Someone took a photo of him walking into the station in regular clothes instead of his uniform, and it spread through social media within hours. Jessica called that afternoon saying the prosecutor had reached out with an offer to reduce my theft charges to a minor violation with just a small fine. She explained they were trying to make this go away quietly now that the state was investigating, but she recommended we reject it completely. We wanted full dismissal or we'd take it to trial where we could present all our evidence about the fake charges and Mitchell's harassment. The prosecutor wasn't happy when Jessica told him our decision, but he couldn't force us to take the deal. That night, Mom and I sat at the kitchen table and really talked for the first time since everything started. We both admitted we'd made mistakes, but we'd done what we thought was right to protect each other. She apologized for not trusting me enough to tell me about Mitchell's threat before the game, and I apologized for the horrible things I'd screamed at her. Our relationship felt different now, stronger in some ways, but with scars that would take time to heal completely. We agreed to be more honest with each other going forward, even when the truth was hard to hear. The next day at the school, Sandra came up to me in the hallway with 2 other teammates behind her. They said they'd been talking and they'd seen enough to know I was telling the truth about everything. Sandra posted on social media that she supported me and knew I'd been targeted, and within an hour, 6 more people shared it. The team was split down the middle now, with some still blaming me for missing the championship and others starting to understand what really happened. It wasn't perfect, but at least I wasn't completely alone anymore, and having even a few teammates believe me made going to the school bearable again. 3 months after that terrible championship night, my life had gotten complicated but better in small ways. The criminal case was still pending, but Jessica felt confident we'd win if it went to trial, especially with all the evidence we'd gathered. 2 small colleges were seriously interested in me for basketball, not Division I schools, but places where I could play and get my degree. Mitchell couldn't actively harass us from desk duty, though we still checked our car for tracking devices and varied our routes everywhere. Mom and I had found our rhythm as a team fighting this together, going to legal meetings and basketball camps and therapy appointments. My therapist helped me work through the trauma and anger, teaching me ways to handle the stress that didn't involve punching walls. I trained hard every morning at the gym, focusing on what I could control like my shooting form and conditioning and grades. The legal system moved super slow, but Jessica said that was normal, that justice took time, especially when you're fighting people with power. Some days felt impossible, but I kept going, knowing that even partial victory against corruption was worth all this fight. Thanks for letting me tag along on this wild ride. My commentary skills definitely got a workout today. Catch you next time, word nerds. Like the video. It helps more than you think.